Hello and welcome to one of our podcasts for Live Life Well. We're trying to encourage our local community how to live life well for their well-being, especially during these rather turbulent times. So today we're joined by Alex Chalk, Member of Parliament for Cheltenham. Hi, Alex.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
So you're joined today by Alex at the top, me, Lottie. So Alex and Lottie were the co-founders of Live Life Well, and Alex, the famous Alex Chalk. So Alex, can you explain to us, at the moment, obviously we're in a crazy situation with coronavirus, everything that we've known has been turned on its head. How is life for you?
Well, I mean, for me, here I am in Cheltenham, so I'm in my study, locked down with my family. I've got Sarah and the two kids, a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. And yeah, I mean, I don't think I've ever spent as much time in my house with my family. So from that point of view, it's quite nice. But it's surreal as well, because if I look at what I've got over here, I've got this is my ministerial folder. So I do all my ministerial work from here. I also do my constituency work as well. So from that point of view, I've got all the technology I need. I can do quite a lot of what I need to do. So helping constituents and so on. A little unusual though, and not entirely unwelcome in terms of being able to spend time with the family. So a lot of people have it much harder than me. Let me make that crystal clear.
Well, I think you've hit on a really important point then. Family is so important, isn't it? But some of us are by ourselves. Some of us are alone, feeling isolated in our community.
Yeah.
So what are you doing to kind of encourage people to get connected, even though we can't now physically connect?
Well, in some ways, as the MP, I don't think that anything that I say will or won't encourage people, because I think people are working this stuff out for themselves. And within the last 2 weeks, we've all become very familiar with Microsoft Teams, with Zoom, with something which has been a complete shock, a house party. I'm not sure if you've tried that, but suddenly, I had that for a bit. It's now come off my phone. It was on my phone for a bit, and then it just dominated.
You forget to lock the chat rooms.
You have to lock the chat room, but it was a slightly strange moment when I, as a minister in the Ministry of Justice, suddenly found, alongside my friends joining, I got a notification that the Lord Chancellor had joined House Party. At that point, I thought that was the time to delete House Party from my phone. Yeah. But look, so, I mean, in answer to your question, of course, being connected with people is important. But I think people are working that out organically for themselves. And without in any way seeking to diminish the impact of isolation, you can only begin to imagine what this was like 100 years ago at the time of the Spanish flu, when people were genuinely, completely 100% isolated. And I think from that point of view, we are certainly in a better position.
So the Spanish flu lasted, it was 2 years, I think. I read somewhere that lasted, that kind of impact on society, that slowdown.
Yeah.
In government, you're obviously hearing things that we may not necessarily be hearing. Is this going to be 2 years, Alex?
Well, yes, I am in government, but don't assume necessarily that I have that much more of an inside track compared to what you've seen on TV. And actually, the approach of the government has been, and I think this is the right one, which is to be as open and transparent about the position as possible. So in other words, when we knew that deaths were coming, we said deaths are going to come. When we knew that lockdown was coming, we said lockdown is coming and life is going to be very different, and also being led by the science. So the short answer is it's very, very difficult to predict. The reason why it's difficult to predict is because, as was expressed in the daily briefing just a few minutes ago, so the time we're recording this is about 20 to 6, about an hour ago we had the briefing, and although people are talking about the exit strategy and all that stuff, Act 1, Scene 1 is you depress the curve, because until that curve is down, by that I mean the curve of new infections, then you can't begin to see what the exit might look like, because at the risk of stating the obvious, as soon as we unlock again, if we do so and that curve isn't depressed, you have the spike. Why do we need to keep the curve down? Because otherwise the NHS gets overwhelmed, and we could have this horrible spectacle of people, overflowing from hospitals, being cared for on Z beds, just the most unimaginable horror. So the short answer is, it's hard to say, because until we know that the curve has been flattened, there's no sensible conversation that one can have. I think the most one can say is that until such time as there is a vaccine for all this, it will never be completely behind us. And I think that is a fact. Until that happens, we are going to be living with it. And the way we manage our existence alongside it will no doubt change, depending on the extent to which we have controlled it. But you can't begin to have those conversations until it's under control.
I think that's the problem, isn't it? There's no way of actually looking at this as a model and a timeline of saying, okay, so, and I saw an interesting article from the World Health Organization the other day, sort of predicting what an ideal exit strategy would look like. But it's impossible to say that. I mean, they were even saying things like all pubs and bars as the last item to reopen would be by the 18th of May, if this weekend was our peak, which indeed everyone thinks it may be. But reading that, you just think that's completely unrealistic when we don't know, as you say, how this disease mutates, how it develops, how actually could we end up with 3 or 4 different strains of it for the next couple of years. And I think that's actually something that the public are quite scared about, because actually could this happen again this time next year when the flu, typical flu is normally around? Could COVID now be something that's around annually? And how on earth, society, do we deal with that?
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that about what the public think, because you have all these folk on TV, you have the politicians and you have the journalists asking the questions that they think the public want to ask and so on, but actually it's not necessarily what the public are thinking. And what we're starting to pick up is that people are taking this more seriously than you might have expected. B, they are scared, exactly as you indicated.
Yeah.
And C, they're not immediately assuming that we want to just lift everything so that we can get back to normal, because they know the implications. And the reason I think that people are thinking that is because with these horror numbers that we're seeing, something like 900 people reported dead today, we are starting to hear of friends and family, people we know who've been affected. So in my own personal experience, I know 2 people from Cheltenham, guys in their 50s, who have just got out of ITU, where they were there for a long time. One of them got clapped out. Such is the enormity of leaving ICU, right? It's the big deal. And as the guy who cuts my hair, or last person who cut my hair, is unfortunately now, he now died as a result of COVID. So I think it's a really important point. People want to know that it's safe to come out. They don't want to be harried and hurried back onto the front line in circumstances where that could lead to more of their friends and families ending up in ICU, and some sadly not emerging. And so I think the British people are cautious, and rightly so.
I think, Alex, do you want to say your personal story?
Mine or that Alex?
Maybe not. No, my mother has actually been in hospital in ICU she was in for over a week on a ventilator. So yeah, but she was the last person on earth we expected to be there. Yes.
Yeah.
And she is. And she's 67 years old. And I have to say that we didn't think she would come out. We definitely had the feeling that this was so unexpected and caught us by such surprise. We were shocked that she made it through, but she is, and she's actually home, which is staggering.
Is this in Cheltenham? Was she in Cheltenham General? Was she in Cheltenham General?
She was. And I have to say,
oh, Alex is frozen, but she'll be back soon.
I'm frozen. No, go. Alex was saying she had to say. Go ahead, Alex.
Let's hear you again.
The incredible work that the nurses have done in the hospital. Yeah. For me, not having any contact with my mother, the only thing that kept me going was the doctors giving me daily updates. And one particular doctor, Ollie Barker, who said to me when he also found out that my dad's got terminal cancer, said to me, I will triage every single day on the phone for you to help with your anxiety levels, because this is a very worrying time and you don't need both parents in the hospital. And there's a nurse that my mum told me about today, who, when she first went in there and the terrifying kind of process of it all, and not knowing anyone, not knowing why you're there because she was out of it, held her hand and said, we'll do this together, we're going to get through this together. And it's just the community and what we're feeling at the moment, and the kindness is real. And I think it's as much as this is a horrible, horrible situation, it's also changed the way we're all going to live for the future, I think. And there has to be a lot of positives that come out of this. It's not all about, yes, it's a tragic disease. Yes, the numbers have been very, very high, but I do think we're going to come out of this with a very, very different way of living. I mean, my postman this morning left flowers on my door, little bunch of daffodils, and I think he's doing that to the whole street. But what a thing to wake up to in the morning. And it's just things like that they don't realise the impact of these small gestures are making to everyone going through this. So yeah, it's been a strange couple of weeks.
I think but like Alex, it's just amazing, isn't it? What our local community, what Cheltenham have just
absolutely.
And the NHS, I know you personally, Alex, have really championed Cheltenham General, trying to keep the A&E open. I mean, they have done the most extraordinary job for Alexandra's parents, and are continuing to do so, working so incredibly hard. And
such
heroes. It's incredible. You must be so proud of Cheltenham.
Well, I am incredibly proud of Cheltenham, and I'm proud, from top to bottom, because every week I meet digitally with the leadership teams, and we get a situation report of everything that's going on in the hospitals, and you talk about the numbers of beds and so on, which is something we might come on to. But a couple of things have really jumped out at me. One, the number of people, the nurses on the front line, who have, as it were, not gone off sick. So those who aren't self-isolating, there's a tiny number of people who aren't on the front line. There's been a huge impetus and desire from those dedicated staff. Everyone says dedicated staff, but these guys are getting on the front line. They're doing everything possible to do so. That's point one. Point two, the number of people who are volunteering to get involved in Cheltenham hospitals is an incredible thing. And that includes those people who are retired medical staff as well. Some of whom might be that little bit older, might be closer to your mum's age than yours, but nonetheless want to get onto the front line. So, I hope you're right when you say things will be different. I think one thing is crystal clear, that we always had a great love and affection for the NHS and huge pride in it. But what this has shown, you really discover what people are like, not when everything's going well, not when everything is easy. You get to see the cut of someone's jib when they're under pressure, and you get to see the kind of organisation that the NHS is when it's under pressure, and it has risen to the challenge magnificently. And I hope you're right, by the way, that things change and that we become a more collegiate society, and that when I go out in the street, as we did to clap for our carers, I saw a whole bunch of people up and down, and we waved at each other and so on. And I hope things do change. I'm, I suppose, a little bit cynical, because I know what we all know what people are like, and they're busy in their lives, and they're paying their mortgages, and they're doing their stuff. But let's not forget this. Just as we remember the Olympics of 2012. Do you remember that? And there was this extraordinary, amazing national feeling, and all the volunteers and stuff. You'll never necessarily completely repeat that, but let's never forget it. Let's never forget it.
Absolutely.
Right. Basically.
Sorry, that's me waffling on too long.
No. What I was just going to say was just in terms of, I think that's where we're at now, but obviously come Tuesday, when they're probably going to announce the lockdown's extended, and we could potentially be in this for another 3 to 4 weeks, do you think people's attitudes are going to change? Do you think people are going to start to get really frustrated that actually, this is a long time now, and this is the kind of worry of, does it then shift to negativity and the goodwill then stops? Like, how can we as a community make sure that we don't let that happen?
Right. Okay, that's a great point. And I think certainly some of the medical advice, when it was being given to the Prime Minister by the Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Scientific Officer about when to call a lockdown, was very mindful of the fact that people fatigue in lockdown quite quickly, and particularly in free societies. This is a free, vibrant, open, diverse society. People don't like being cooped up. So your question is, will people get fed up? There are two critical things that will make a difference to that. First, the quality of the information which explains to people why it's necessary, if it's necessary. In other words, it's really important to keep going with these daily briefings for them to be clear and credible and to communicate the message. Point one. Point two is there has to be a carefully calibrated safety valve in terms of allowing people to take their exercise and for it not to be policed in an overbearing way. You know, so we heard this stuff about sometimes it being a bit heavy-handed in some parts of the country. I'm really pleased to say, that's my daughter. I'm really pleased to... Do you want to come and say hello? Do you want to come and say
no? Come on in.
Come and say hi.
A little shy.
She's shy.
Alex, being real, and that's what I love. I love that we're working.
Come say quickly, Laura. Laura, come and say hi. No, she's shy. Okay. All right. Anyway, I'll just shut the door. So hang on. The point I was making. So the point I was making is that yeah. So they've got to police it properly. And here in Gloucestershire, I mean, I speak to the Chief Constable quite regularly. They're doing it. I think they're basically doing it right. I mean, I dare say you'll have small individual examples, but overall, I think they're doing a great job. So that's the second thing. But the third thing is stuff that you're doing, which I think is really important. I know you did your Wellbeing Festival, which was hugely successful last year. And I think insofar as people can use the marvels of modern technology to first socialize, which we talked about at the beginning, but second, you know, there might be other things they want to do, whether it's physical exercise, whether it's mindfulness, or whatever floats your boat, basically. I think that is going to be important as well. So yes, we all have to take responsibility for our own well-being and all that stuff, but I know that there are resources which you provide, which I think are definitely worth a look at.
Well, exactly, that we felt a massive impetus after doing Cheltenham Wellbeing Festival and saying, you know, we are championing well-being. We want our community to have a great well-being spirit and experience all these incredible practitioners that we have, that we wanted to set up something which we set up, Live Life Well, as you know, to support, and this is another thing I'd like to move on to, support our local businesses and our local practitioners. So we've got www.livelifewell.uk, and we'd love to ask you as well what your thoughts are about. We're trying to showcase what local practitioners are doing in this time when they physically can't work, where they've never needed a profile more than how can we help our local businesses? We're trying to put on isolation timetables, get them online, but in reality, if this goes on for too much longer, what's going to be the end result for them? Can they survive this?
Well, it's going to depend on the business. Now, you know what the government has done. So it's been this huge package that Rishi Sunak has come up with. And I mean, I think by international comparisons, it's gone down very well. I think he's been quite praised internationally for the particularly the furlough scheme, but then there's also the SEISS scheme. So that's the self-employed scheme. But look, the reality is, none of these are as good as being back at work. I completely get that. And the longer this goes on, it's a real concern to me. The more damage is done to the economy, which is why it cannot continue for a day longer than is absolutely necessary. But I mean, at the risk of stating the bleeding obvious, if you unlock it too quickly, then the damage that will be done to the economy will outstrip that as well, because everyone will take fright, they'll all go home, and no one will then trust the science, and it will be dreadful. So the question is, you know, how do you, from adversity, do you try to derive opportunity? Bluntly, there will be some businesses for whom that is frankly impossible, right? So I spend a lot of time speaking to people who are involved in the holiday industry. I mean, a nightmare, a total unadulterated disaster for reasons that are blindingly obvious. Second, I speak to dentists. You know, they've been told by the general dental officer, you cannot do stuff unless it's an emergency with PPE and goodness knows what. Now, there's no glib answers to that. There are no straightforward answers. But as part of my job doing this stuff, right, you know, the ministerial stuff, we are trying to get the courts running again. Now, look, digital stuff, what we're doing, you and me now, is as old as the hills, or it's only 10 years old. But the truth is we haven't leveraged it to the full extent that we can. And when it was being said before by Alex, you know, things are going to be different in the future, and in terms of how we view each other as a society, digitally things are going to be different. Because now I increasingly think that, is it going to be sensible for you to get on a plane and go to New York for some business meeting? I think increasingly people will say, oh, that's absurd, let's just do it on Zoom. Why on earth are you... Anyway, So the point I'm making is there will be areas of our economy which can operate differently, and areas of our society. So trials are an example. Previously, you would never dream of doing a complete trial with the advocates potentially remotely. You wouldn't be looking to do a lot of medicine. I mean, in the past, as little as 15 years ago, the idea of a GP giving you a diagnosis without actually being able to prod and poke you was unthinkable. But now a huge amount of that happens. So this, of course, is accelerating that. But the reason why I made those early remarks is because I think we would be doing a massive disservice to a whole load of people out there who are hurting so much now, and for whom the clever little gizmo that you and I are using right now ain't going to make the blindest bit of difference. And we have to recognize that. So let's, of course, do what we can, but let's all assume that actually it's not as bad as all that, because it's horrific.
And also, I think we're obviously an events-based business. So when it comes to events and retail and the high street, we were already struggling with retail, and Cheltenham is built on a foundation of its events and its festivals, which I know they're amalgamating or planning to amalgamate all of their festivals for the year into the Lit Fest in October.
Yeah.
And our festival moved to next year, and we're also launching a digital live festival to give people a little support in the meantime. But do you think it's going to completely change the landscape of what our high street and
doing, Alex?
Like? Sorry, it's all right. Usual story. It's because you threw me with saying do it in landscape, not a portrait. Okay, there you go. This is a bit like, he's such an old codger. He can't work his bloody machine. Right, anyway, yes.
Technology.
Yeah. What's this interweb thing? No, look, so is it going to change the face of Cheltenham High Street? I fear it may well do. It may well do, because I mean the government's done some important things. So that you'll have heard about the business rates discount. I mean, that's basically been waived. No one has to pay business rates. And if I had £1 for everyone who in the last 5 years has raised the issue of business rates with me, I would be a multi-millionaire. So it's a massive issue. And I think to waive them for a year has been a big deal. So the government had already reduced them by about a third for businesses with a rateable value under 51,000. They're now out of the picture altogether. That's a massive deal. The second thing, as you know, is small businesses get a slug of, which fall within the relevant categories, get £10,000, or in some £25,000. That has made a massive difference. I mean, I've had people write to me with a screenshot of their bank account showing 10 grand going into it. I can't believe it. I've just been given £10,000.
It's brilliant. It's very good. It's a very good package.
It's massive. And so, if you think of a small town like Cheltenham, okay, a middle-sized town or whatever, £24.5 million has just come into businesses, and that's just being chucked out right, left and centre. So that does make a difference, because it allows people a bit of breathing space. If they furloughed their staff, right, so they got them off the books, they're not having to pay for that, they're not having to pay their business rates, they've received 10 grand in as well. It's not going to make them rich or happy, but it means that they might be able to pay some rent. And then the fourth thing is that we as politicians can't intervene in private contracts for very good reason, but we are nonetheless saying to landlords, who I know are facing their own difficulties, but commercial landlords, look, you've got to share some of the pain on this as well. So I genuinely feel that we are doing everything we can to try to help the high street ride this out. But sometimes, as King Canute found, as he sat there trying to stop the tide coming in, this Viking king, and he said, I'm going to try and, there's only so much you can do. And so what we're looking at now is a force of nature. And if this goes on for too long, the pressure on the high street will get bigger and bigger and bigger. And no amount of money from the Treasury is going to be able to stop that. And, last thing I'll just say on this is you may have heard that Debenhams have filed for administration. We've got Debenhams in Cheltenham. That's a massive store. There are always questions about House of Fraser as well. So I think that we've given the best possible firepower to try to stop radical stuff happening. But as you say, it was under pressure before, and this is an existential threat.
But I think what we can take from that is you're saying to all these local businesses, we hear you, we see you, we feel you.
Yeah.
You are not all by yourself. If we can help you, we will, and we can, and we will build together. It's, you know, and it's sometimes it's that support and acknowledgement that can go a long way in times. It's when people feel so isolated, and that's, again, I mean, my Alex talked about the Wellbeing online digital festival that we're going to set up for a weekender, because, you know, we've got to support the individual as well as our connections, not just in Cheltenham, but beyond that. Cheltenham people want to hear from other people. They want to see how other people are doing. So we want to kind of get that conversation going, and the conversations that are uncomfortable, the conversations that might not necessarily be comfortable saying face to face, can now go away with that little bit of distance as well, which I think would mean that people are actually able to get more from talks that they may not have been able to do face to face. So I think there's a lot of positives that we can draw on, as well as acknowledging the negatives that of course are going to happen as a result from this.
Right. Well, that I think is the balanced and positive approach, and I think that's right. You know, from every crisis comes an opportunity, and there's no doubt, and you would know this better than anyone, that positivity, being positive, glass half full, and so on, is important. And you know what? There are things which are going to improve. I touched on them briefly before, but one of the things, just very, very quickly, that I'm sort of is in my kind of worry list as a minister is how we're going to be delivering legal services in Europe post-Brexit. Okay, it might sound like kind of a niche issue, but there's no doubt that this experience completely reshapes the whole paradigm, because if in fact you've got a situation where in the past you'd need to have a physical presence in another country, and then there's a question mark about whether you're going to be given regulatory access and all that kind of stuff. If you don't need to be in that country, then everything's very different if you're doing everything over Zoom. Do you see what I mean? So suddenly people are going to be looking at things differently. But I just want to say one last thing as well, because this is the point you're making about being listened to. One of the things I've discovered through this process is there are lots of Brits abroad, Cheltenham people abroad, Peru, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, the Zandam, the Amsterdam, loads of ships and stuff. What they have valued is knowing that I'm speaking to them, talking to them, listening to their experience, even if I can't necessarily wave a magic wand and immediately get them back, although we got the overwhelming majority back. It's that being connected, that knowing you're being listened to, that you haven't been forgotten, that you're not isolated, which is so important for the human condition, I think.
I totally concur. I mean, we've got an aging population as well. We've got people in our nursing homes, and I've been walking past and seeing those amazing rainbows. They've all been trying to say thank you and get that connection, and I think that community spirit that we've seen has just been so overwhelmingly supportive for those people who are going out and volunteering, who are saying, I don't want to feel useless. I might be furloughed, my future might be goodness knows what, but I want to help and I want to get involved. So Alex, there's so much we've talked about today, but from your perspective, what are the 3 key things we can take away from this conversation? What should people be thinking of in regards to coronavirus affecting their community, their Cheltenham right now?
Okay, well, the first thing is, forgive the public health broadcast, but it's really important, that it's always darkest before the dawn. But we have to, for that dawn to come as quickly as possible, we've just got to stay the course. So you're at home, Alex is at home, I'm at home. Let's stick with it, because we can talk about all sorts of other stuff to do with testing and PPE and stuff. But ultimately, the thing that makes the biggest difference is stopping the transmission. That's how we get through this quickly as possible. So let's stick with it. That's point number 1. Point number 2 is, don't forget, this will end. It will end. We will rebuild as a society. We mustn't allow ourselves to kind of become despondent or depressed or morose. We're a strong people. We're a resourceful people. We are a considerate and kind people, I think, in the main. We'll get through this and our society will rebound. And then I think the third point is, feeding into that message of hope, is that yes, we will have to mourn those we've lost, those who are close to us, but we will also need to reflect that there will be a society, a new society, from which we can draw positive features from this experience. First, that sense that we will come together to show common humanity and do so in a way that is energetic and thoughtful and kind and loving. And second, because we will be a newly networked society, better able to embrace a future, first internationally, second ecologically, because I bet you we're not going to need to be making all those trips that we in the past thought was indispensable. So let's stay the course. Let's remember that there will be a future, and let's take heart from the fact that that future will in some ways be a brighter and better one than we thought might ever have been the case.
And can we finish on a brighter note? What is Alex Chalk going to be doing with his family for Easter Monday?
For Easter, well, for Easter Sunday, okay,
Sunday.
Just stay there. I'm going to show you.
The family project going on.
Woohoo!
Oh, the least funny.
This, okay, so the good news is, I have this from last year, and it will be in the garden. This is the good news. The bad news is I have 2 children and only one of those.
Oh no! Do you know what you need to do, Alex? Have you got a rainbow in your window?
You've got a no. Oh, well, my girls actually. Yeah, we do have a rainbow. We do have a rainbow. It's not in the window, but yeah.
Morrison's are delivering eggs to houses with rainbows in their windows.
I'm getting a rainbow.
That's good. That's good. No, we've got a few eggs actually, so we're going to do an Easter egg hunt in the back garden.
Oh, lovely.
That sounds absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Alex Chalk.
Not at all.
For Cheltenham for joining us today. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye.
You too. Everybody stay safe.